Rebus Ola, once Leth was cut up, we began celebrating our newfound. We drank our beers together, ordered more food, and the humans party joined us and was gracious enough to pay once everyone had finished making a fuss. Over Nick's dietary requirements, Moo and the other orcs started talking. Their conversation was largely about unified chiefdoms. This would be interesting to someone who loves traveling, is my least favorite activity. Being a hunter, however, includes sitting in a cart or on a Nars for the entire day only to go to location where people are going. Look at you funny, that got my attention. I started by turning away from the orcs, listening to Hyoliath and G instead. Then they began discussing the political events in the Empire, even more dull discussion than the Empire. 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 Ata and Nick had a chat. Beginning their talk made me smile. Athano and GI are both level 13. I am level 12 and Moo is level 15. It wasn't unexpected to learn that the party was made up of under 10s, excluding for Omira, who does not have a level. What I found it funny though that Athan Nick is almost at the same level she is, has barely reached level 9 and is stuck there. 9 for more than a year. Everyone else in the celebration isn't over 10, Omira asked. I would be too, but I specialize in EA, answered quickly. My interest is in attack, magic, fire, ice, and darkness. This is the only non-offensive spell this is only minor healing. I'd be out of work without it. Damn right, we have no use for a mage that can't heal, I laughed. How many, Nick inquired. What spells do you know? Assault spells are more powerful. Compared to most mages, my magic core is basically mediocre. Although I can increase the intensity of my spells. Thanks to my education and training, Nick smiled and said, I only know 7. Only 4 of the spells are attack-based. Spells, I couldn't help but laugh more. Etha is pretty arrogant about herself. This chat must be magical. Of course, there is some needling going on. There's always room for further needling, he knows. Almost as many spells as you do, I said. Say, Nick, if the whole coming home stuff. If things don't work out, shut your darn mouth, Etha hissed. I'm under contract with you. You can't replace me even if you wanted to. Uttered a nasty chuckle and grabbed a piece from my bell popper, which the chefs had outdone themselves. Bell poppers take careful preparation. Since the seeds pop when directly exposed to water, you've already watered the plant. You have to be extra careful while cooking. It prevents the seeds from prematurely. When you pop each seed, you will find a sweet powder that is frequently used to sweeten. Other food products, the remainder of the bell poppers, have a slightly bitter taste. So consuming the entire plant becomes one. A hell of a culinary experience it is. My favorite cuisines as I ate the ladies. Explain the impact of an attack. The spell relies on both expertise and the quantity of magic behind the spell. Basically, a dumbass with a lot of magic can launch a fireball as passionate as a smartass with only a little magic. I chuckled and asked if AA was certain she had an average amount of magic before she could react. He cracked his neck and rubbed his pants. This has been amazing, but I am getting tired. We're leaving tomorrow, right? He requested as soon as feasible. Ideal, Yoke said, until we have a cause. The stall, we all stared at each other. Nobody could think of anything. We kept the equipment well maintained. I hadn't used it much, and it wouldn't take a long time to gather up the necessary items. We all agreed to go on the hike tomorrow. Will be the day of our raid, and left. The Venor Guild, we walked together till reached our respective destinations, which happened to be across the street. The inn where we were staying there wasn't the worst places to stay in this town, but they were staying at the Merrick's Inn. It wasn't surprising given how Nick swiftly dropped 10 gold earlier. However, I still felt a pang of jealousy. Marfi Ince is well known for their extravagance and luxury massages, professional chefs, climate control is super, soft beds, even softer bedding, and even hot water was standard and all. Anytime my explosions pass like 215 in a unicorn animals, Like, I'd always wanted to stay in one, to experience what it is like to be pampered. Unfortunately, despite the cheapest accommodations cost a full gold piece. Each night, it is difficult to justify that kind of expenses that you may need to pay. For equipment repairs, even 50 silver, it would cost a lot just to spend the night. Our inn cost only 20 copper per room daily. Night, we teamed up to save some, except for Etha, of course. Always use the female card to avoid have to share a room with any of us. I let out an exaggerated sigh while watching. Nick's party enters the Marek's Inn, then I nonchalantly turned to stare at G with sharper eyes. Absolutely not, he responded, but we have 10. Gold, I claimed. Would not cost more than 5 yun, Mako said with a lot. If we double up, you will have less investment than I have. It would just cost 3 gold. Ha! Gold will be sadly missed if we end up destroying our equipment tomorrow. He scoffed, and we had already paid for our rooms here. Do not give you refunds. Who cares? I said. It's only a few. Copper, we could be dead tomorrow, Geely. Should live a bit. I'd rather be dead than impoverished. Come on, it's not that. Unfortunately, we will still have 7 gold. That will be enough to replace the majority of our furthermore. If we are effective with, we will qualify for the vampire hunt, better paid hunt, and what if we don't succeed, we will die. I will not have to worry about it, and I could tell that Etha and Mu were completely with. On this day, I was fairly aloof, but there's a strong chance he'd vote for me if I called for one. But calling for a vote here would weaken G's no Mu, and we discussed who should be our next leader, and we'd settled on G's. And this is our second leader. And we'd settled on G's, and even temperament and innate situational awareness would make him a wonderful leader. However, he is humble enough to decline position if we attempted to make it official. So naturally, we were doing our best to place him in that situation without him. Realizing, wait a minute, why am I the one making this decision? He demanded, demonstrating his innate situational awareness since you're the one carrying. I responded fast about the money, but I don't want you to ruin our stay by complaining about how we aren't being miserly. Whole damn time, as if I were gods above and below. Please grant me patience. We can stay at Merrick's, but I still reserve the right to the whole. Once I finished bouncing with joy, we grabbed our belongings from the inn and explained our decision to the most understanding innkeeper. Then we headed across the street. Once we disappeared around the corner. Innkeeper, then we headed across the street to check into I tried to keep it calm when I went inside, but the sheer richness of the show made my jaw drop, and it is usual to look for gold trim in cut-in buildings. It is not typical for that trim to include diamonds embedded in it, but on top of that, in the middle of the lobby, was a multi-level gold fountain with water spilling out of the greatest blue. The sapphire I'd ever seen hit me as 3 gold would be a bargain to remain in. The lemon fountain looks like it was. The lemon bed is the largest. It's just a diamond. The lemon bed is the largest. And the sapphire I'd ever seen hit me as 3 gold would be a bargain to remain in. I'm in a place like this. We received a raise. The front desk worker raised an eyebrow. However, apart from that, he was quite nice and professional. There was a small disagreement about who the kobold would bed with, but AA eventually folded when confronted with the idea of having to share a room with one of us. We surrendered. 3 gold, deposited our belongings in rooms, and proceeded to enjoy the first thing I did was I visited the spa and received a lovely mud bath. After a nice rinse, we went to the sauna. I ran into Nick. Nash, hello guys, I greeted cheerfully as I seated down across from them. Quite hot in here, isn't it? Nah, it's exactly right, Nash said gruffly. Yup, not too hot at all, Nick wiped the sweat from his forehead. I grinned as I realized what I had walked. I was in a tough guy tournament. Full swing, I let out a sigh and reclined back against the wall. I knew I had the advantage because I had recently walked. You're right, this is quite great. Said we sat in silence for a while. allowing the heat to gradually bake us alive. Ultimately, the last glimmers sunset beaming through the SAAs, only the window started to fade once the illumination was completely gone. And finally, darkness calmed. Nick cleared his throat. Standing up in this heat is nice. I suppose we should go to bed now, with an air of diplomacy. We've got a long day ahead of us and will require sleep and restoration. Nash and I glanced at each other. On the one hand, human suggestions could be regarded as a sign of weakness, would allow us to poke fun of him. On the other hand, he made an excellent point. Making fun of him would result in having to spend more time in the sauna, proving we weren't as weak as him. I smiled when I realized Nash was also considering that I joined them late and had quite the advance AG in this contest. Hoon, right? Nash said, standing. We will be heading to bed. I might as well, I sighed, and followed. Nick and Nash got out of the sauna and chose a shower stall to wash away the chill. Water was a stark contrast to what I experienced at the saunas. I struggled with the sauna's heat. We maintained our composure once we finished. We nodded at each other and proceeded to our beds. Snores greeted me as I entered the room and somehow managed to sanitize his gear, which was currently laying neatly next to his bed, my own. The clothing had carried the aroma of cobalt, corpses from the dungeon, so I'd left it for the launders. I disrobed and laid in bed and unsuccessfully attempted to fall. After 90 minutes, once we were finished with the cobalt later, we drove to the launders. I disrobed and laid in bed and unsuccessfully attempted to fall. At first, I blamed Hayo's snoring. That didn't actually last for long. However, Moo's snoring is significantly louder once you sleep through it. Mountain of an Orc snores, you can sleep through everything. My thoughts turned. I was thinking about tomorrow and realized that the reason I could not sleep was because nerve vampires are some of the most fearsome opponents a hunter or adventurers can encounter. They're smart, fast, and extraordinarily powerful. Plus, they can transform you into one of them. Even though most legendary weapons cannot last forever. I've only got steel swords produced by orcs are relatively inexpensive, is effective against the majority of other beasties. However, stabbing a vampire will only irritate it. Beginning, I have no idea how well my shields will hold up against their irons. With a sigh, I rose from my bed. There is just one remedy for anxious insomnia, I was exhausted and remembered seeing a sign. For a training area, I determined that some exercise would be good for me. Fortunately, it did not take long to find. When I saw the sign and followed its arrow, I opened the door and was met with the sound of wood smacking into a training area. I turned to see Nick practicing. Hey, Nick, with a wooden sword, I remarked as he turned to look at me. I have trouble sleeping, he said. I'm fidgeting with the practice weapon. Hold on a second, I need to look at that. Hold on a second. He turned to look at the practice weapon. Hold on a second. I thought I should acquire some training. Need to be in peak form tomorrow. Here, I grabbed a wooden sword and shield. Nick watched me as I picked a dummy, strike the dummy's neck for a little, and went without saying another word. Watched the door close behind him. Shaking off the paranoia that arose, it was an awkward interaction. Definitely unusual, however. I swear, his voice sounded. Nick Smith was a different person. When we finished our excellent brunch, after checking our gear, we started our walk to the dungeon. Lith remained behind, claiming to be ineffective in both fighting and long. When no one argued, he walked with an expression of agony. With him, the hike itself did not appear. It was challenging at first, but my body felt heavy for some reason. I had slept well. Nevertheless, I had to suppress more than a few. Yars as we walked, in contrast to my weariness, the kobolds appeared to gain more. We became more thrilled as we approached the dome. In the dungeon, we get rid of the suckers. You can meet the Lord, Cobalt replied. Hune is going to be quite thrilled. Nash asked, who is your Lord exactly? Lord is the Lord, it tilted its head. Confusion knows many magic speaks in We stopped marching because heads cannot die. All of us looked at the cobalt with blank expressions. Nothing came to mind based on that description, but something that knows a lot about magic and communicates telepathically. Doesn't sound amazing not to note that kobolds appear to worship it. Yulk gently cleared his throat. Cobalt, does your master have any skin? He asked. Yeah, I think. Wait, yeah, he does, the cobalt remarked eagerly, hesitated and wiped its chin. Does not wear. However, it sounds a lot like a lich, remarked uneasily. I don't know that word. What is a lich? One of the greatest crimes against nature ever committed by a mortal Mako, explains sternly arrogance and aspiration culminating in many people are unaware of the pure evil and spite that exists. The cobalt crossed its arms. Angry, but the Lord is not bad. He helps. No one else helps kobolds. Shitty people assume we're trash farmers. People believe we have a new sense, but the Lord teaches us new things, cures us when we get harmed, and it even tells us when do good work. The Lord never hurts. Kobolds come from my PRP, so I assume those nasty folks are far more terrible than... Maybe your Lord isn't a lich, Moo said. Or perhaps he is a lich. We'll see if he likes kobolds. How did you and your Lord survive? Vampires? I inquired as we resumed our trek. I felt unwell when they came in. Lord told me the incorrect type of kobold, the swimmer explained that the sucker didn't. I didn't get to push the secret rock. Die for the Lord, and the sucker captured. Why didn't the vampire murder you? Lord, I've already said that the Lord cannot die. One time we believed he did when the ceiling crumbled and we were quite devastated. Discussing it, he returned 3 days later and was upset because we had stopped working and made a tremendous mess. He didn't hit us, though that was wonderful. Most lords are smack-hat pleased, but that's not conducive. Good for a good workplace favorable to good work. Surroundings, I offered helpfully. Yeah, not conducive to a good working environment. Rather than smacks, he made us apologize and tidy up after ourselves. And then he gave head pats, ear scratches, and fish with bread, really delicious bread. No green things on. Well, coming back from the dead is a clear indication that this guy is a lich. GI. Cobalt, how do we know that you, Lord, won't attack us once we defeat the vampires, since he is not going? The Lord doesn't hurt. Helpers, we stared at the cobalt, expecting him to elaborate further, gazed back at us, seemingly confused by our... After a little pause, G sighed. In frustration, fine, let it go, he said as he turned. Fine, let it go, he said as he turned. Wait, I interrupted. What is your name? Cobalt? Even if you don't question. Nah, reminds me that I am the last. This also means that I'm the most certain. Gi said as we went on, you're the best by default, why not? You can't count, Moo remarked with a grin. Is it past 7? I believe that the greatest cobalt would. Be able to count to 10, I don't know what. Sam sighed after 7. I added 8, trying to be helpful. 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Who are 9 and 10, and why did 7 consume them? How do numbers eat things? Sith sighed louder. I've had these questions for a long time, and nobody ever responds to the realization that Cobalt was caught up in a joke, which made me hesitate. Wait, did you translate it correctly? Question 10. Yes, how is that pun in more than one language, and I am an artificial? Intelligence is not an etymologist. What is studying bugs related to... No, that is entomology, the study of words and their history, I mumbled. To GI remarked. That's the... We halted in front of a melon. That was constructed entirely of polished tan. The brown stone reminded me of my grandma's countertops made of fake granite. The mausoleum had 2 columns on either side of the entryway, which was looking for any kind of door that the brightness made it impossible to see beyond. Nonetheless, the mausoleum had a door of darkness protects whatever inside it. Over the entryway, the carving showed 2 winged figures, kneeling to a skull. At first glimpse, I assumed they were angels. Closer inspection revealed that they were armored. The skulls of the elves were not pointy teeth, thus it was probably elven as well. Get it now, Mako said. The skull is because of the Lich Rebus, introduced EA questioned. How does that make sense? Clearly, this dungeon is older than the Lich. How do you figure out who countered? The monsters within the dungeon are spilling out of it at some time. Right, Etha looked around for assurance. Are I the only one who thinks that? Suggested that someone stopped the monsters such as the Lich Kobolds. There were baddies before Lord S.E. added helpfully and stated they were making the terrible humans. So, he killed them all, Daddy. So how can the skull be referring to the Lich? Etha demanded smugly. It's clearly not native to this dungeon. Sick. Gods grant me patience, Rebus moaned. Why? Do you think this sculpture was always like this? Liches are megalomaniacal, so what the hell? Wouldn't he alter the carving to fit? Will we argue or not? Nash inquired whether we were going to get to work. Burning daylight. Like that matters? Rebus laughed. Darker than the crack of my ass in there. You'll have to walk back unless you plan. On camping in the dungeon, a terrible odor wafted from the dungeon as if to demonstrate arithmetic. Nash's Pointmoo chuckled as Rebus sighed. Okay, let's go, Yolitha and Almira. Be in the back with G and Cobal Nash. Nick is in the center, supporting Mako Hano, and I will be there for everyone who needs it, Rebus replied. Remember, the purpose is to stop their movement and push them. The fire made it difficult to breathe. Asked for a little wind spear to aid with. That yoke said, I'll do it. I don't want the... As the tube collapsed, the yoke winked at me. Everyone else prepped their gear, Rebus, and Hyo strapped on their shields, unsheathed their swords. Nash hefted his axe. Mako studied his pike G, played with the string of his bow, trying to avoid appearing as scared as I felt. Mako, to avoid appearing as scared as I felt, I drew, my sword has a lot of dead kobolds. Mind the stench, G.I. remarked. Let's I following Nash as we entered. As soon as I entered the dungeon, hairs on the back of my neck and arms, standing rigid, the air was filled with the stench of death, and a feeling of dread. I stifled my instinctive inclination to panic. Cast light, everyone else activated their lights, and we began our grim march. Down the hallway, beware traps, Moose said. The enormous orc began gently pushing his pike on the tiled floor till I heard a click, followed by a grate. Nash dropped spikes from the ceiling, let out a low whistle as the trap faded, which was unusual for dungeon. He stated that there are traps in this area. Mako said sadly, cutting dungeons are significantly more harmful than the dungeons in the Chiams, and it isn't because of the monsters I see the traps, Sam said. I have been here since I was born. May avoid by just stepping around them. We do not know where they are, Mako contradicted me, helping Sammy's feet patter against the tile and his wagging tail. He brushed my leg as he ran past me. Ran past Nash, but Moo caught him with a second more, gazed at the enormous hand. The enormous orc was clearly confused. If you are at the front, you will be the first. Mako revealed how he became a vampire's target. About you, ride on my shoulders and point. Instead, when we see a trap vampire, you can hop down. Long way up, SE responded to see if I could. Jump down from there, and I'll assist you get down, Nash remarked. Sammy looked back. Mako and Nash went back and forth. Okay, Hano shrugged, smiled, and Rebus grinned as Cobal, who was noticeably Mako, who was shorter than the dwarfs, climbed. Mountain Moo assisted the young lizard up. Essie sat with his legs on each side. Mako's neck reminded me of mine. Cousin is with his. We continued until we found the first kobold corpses. The terrible stench in the air threatened to make me vomit. I held my nose as we pushed past. Breathing through my mouth did not help. Essie pointed out another trap. We sneaked past it and ran into more. This pattern repeated with dead kobolds. Essie sighed after repeating itself several times. Pointed to one of the kobold corpses. That's my daddy. If I hadn't become sick, I would have been right next to him. Maybe have made a difference. But the Lord said I wouldn't have guessed the Lord knows best. Do you want to say goodbye? Mock inquired. Why is Hune dead? Sam tilted his head. Can't hear when you're dead, right? Suppose not, Mako answered glumly. Hey, Sam, how old are you? I asked. I'm 3 years old. Reptilian grinned, almost groaning up. I almost told Seth my age, but then realized his reaction would presumably be a question. Ask about who they are and why you ate them. Instead, I focused my attention on Revis, who put out a low whistle that, this explains so much, the dwarf chuckled. He shook his head. When do kobolds become adults? I don't know, Essie responded with a shrug. Continue moving, Mako interrupted. It would be better if you quit. Essie spoke with an unusual tone and a vacant phrase. The vampires know you're here. 2 of them have come to meet you. Prepare yourselves. Hunters, the Rebus questioned if there is very little time before they reach you. I am the one that this one calls Lord. Speaking with you through my only surviving vassal, get ready. They will come. Mako knelt slightly and Nosh grasped SEI. From UCF, we began to hear the soft hum. Just as we were getting ready, we heard footsteps. Our weapons Rebus and you prepared their shields, and you hefted their pike. Nosh and I took positions behind the 3, prepared to intercept any vampires. That got through. UF cocked his bow as Eul and Elmira prepared to cast their. Seth glanced up at us and shook. His head in confusion as to what was going on. When asked if the vampires were coming, I replied, "Get behind me." Seath gazed for a moment, then scampered to the rear of our formation. We waited as the footsteps grew louder, ready to see vampires. Rushing from the shadows toward us, then the footsteps stopped, and I couldn't see them, but I knew they were watching. We like the creeping sense of terror. When your nightlight goes out as a child, when you know there is something in your closet and beneath your bed. As you get older, you might tell yourself that you are imagining it and that there is nothing there. But this time, not my imagination? Rebus inquired. Shh, you're just going to watch us. Big, evil vampires are too afraid to have a real battle. As a couple of pallid dwarfs stepped out of the darkness, they wore ragged garments and their fingers' end. With sharp claws, wicked fanged grins were printed on their pasty faces. We are not those who should be terrified of. They remarked that I almost couldn't follow it. Motions when it finished. Speaking, it dashed towards Rebus. Other vampires came towards Mu, moving. Just as swiftly, Hyo moved in front of Mako, stabbed the orc with his pike. The vampire was seeking Rebus. Mu hefted his pike up, with the vampire skewered upon it as HK's sword. The vampire's glow flashed briefly, smacked into the earth before me. We made short eye contact as Nash axe crashed on the heads of both vampires, rolled in opposite directions on the floor. Pile them up, Golly exclaimed. God! I halted the vampires and burned them, head with my boot in a rush of nausea, crashed against my gut, battling it. Crashed against my gut, battling it. I grabbed up the head by the hair and towed on the body that it had been linked to No, and Mu tossed the pieces from the other vampire on the pile. I swallowed deeply and held up my. The hand Larif sack emitted strong heat. My palm engulfed the mound of vampire parts, eerie shrieking, and the scent of burned meat permeated the air. The knot in my stomach twisted even further as I watched the bodies convulse. That's what it would look like if Rebsno or GLE. Unable to fight it any longer, I turned, left my party, and spilled my breakfast on the tiled floor. Well, that it was easy than I expected, Rebus stated gently, ignoring my display. Let's hope it stays like way, Mu said. Cest questioned, coldly, why the person puked. He ate a terrible swimmer.